Welcome everyone. This is another in our series of called Natural Burial Community Benefits. It's part of our Tuesday at 2 free public education workshops. And we move on to us. This is who we are. We are WasteWater Education. We are a private 501c3 public nonprofit. We work with the private and the public sector. We work with individuals, local governments, education entities. You will see that our mission is to increase awareness that water quality is directly linked to the use of appropriate wastewater systems and their management. And we've had a question about why a wastewater organization is concerned about natural burial or about burial in any shape or form. Well, the purpose is, if you work in the wastewater field, you're also talking about groundwater and surface water quality. And this is an area that we've looked at once before with Cynthia when we hosted the Michigan Environmental Health Association workshop here year before last. And there was a lot of interest in looking at this in a bit more detail. So we're very happy to have Cynthia come back and bring us up to date on current legislation and current research. This is me. I'm your moderator for the day. I'll put this contact information into the chat window, and it's the same as came with your confirmation email, but just in case. Just to let you know, we are seeking funding to be able to provide full closed caption services for our programs. And we're not quite there yet, but if you would like a text transcript of today's workshop, just email me. At the bottom there, you will see our legal disclaimer. This is intended to provide a forum for the free exchange of ideas among individuals and organizations. The intent is to form partnerships and resource networks for anyone interested in integrated water resource planning and management. The information and conclusions presented in these events represent the opinions of the presenters. They should not be construed as necessarily representing the opinions of or being an endorsement by WasteWater Education 501c3. However, that being said, we are extremely pleased to welcome Cynthia Beal, who, when we first met, was with the Natural Burial Company. She still is, but has now expanded into a very eminent academic forum, the Oregon State University College of Agricultural Sciences. And at this point, Cynthia, I'm going to pass the baton over to you to advance your slides. Just click the forward and back arrow in your slide explorer. Thank you, Cynthia.
And thank you, Dindra, and thank you for that introduction. And please feel free to interrupt during the course of this if either you notice someone has something they want to say and you think it's the right time, or if I'm hitting the wrong button, because there are a lot of buttons on this screen and I'm not an old hand yet. So following up just with what Dindra said, that little bit she read about the disclaimer, I'm going to start off immediately by saying that I'm representing my own opinions and not necessarily the opinions of Oregon State University. I've had the extremely good fortune in the last few years to begin a relationship with Oregon State in my desire to understand the impacts of cemetery management and to help introduce the idea to both the industry, the general public, and governance that cemeteries are they're a significant feature in our social landscape. They need more attention. They need an incredible amount of research. And the people who own and operate or govern cemeteries need the kind of information that a university can provide to answer the hard questions. Before we get right into the slideshow today, however, I'm going to do just a little quick dodge off into my company's website using this handy tool here that I'm going to let start loading. And for those of you who don't have a very fast internet connection, it may load in the background while I'm talking, but I wanted to, whoops, and I did a typo here.
Yeah, and actually,
Hold on
Cynthia, you
just a
could
second,
click on the
gang.
link that's in the chat window.
Oh, okay. Well, let's just try that. No, it's
Okay,
not.
if you
it's not going for me.
yeah, highlight it, copy
not a
it,
live
and
link.
paste it into your web tool window.
Well, I've just got an arrow, and it's not giving me the ability to copy, as you can see. So let me just try that one more time, okay?
Yeah, I can do that for you if you want.
Well, it's almost in. There we
Okay.
go. And so as it's loading, you all could take a note of the URL. It's www.naturalburialcompany.com. And in the sidebar, there's a little box that says SCM, that stands for Sustainable Cemetery Management, Educational Links. And I'm not going to go to these links right now, but for those of you who can't stay for the full presentation, I just wanted to make sure you had access to them. There are 4 links that I consider pretty helpful. The first one is the Federal Trade Commission's Green Guides link, and it gives a lot of guidance about the use of the word green, which is a regulated term. The second link is the Oregon State University Online Education Program link that takes you straight into the online education program, where we will be doing the bulk of our offerings over the next couple of years as we come up with courses that address the needs of cemetery managers. The third one is
Cynthia, your
sorry.
web page isn't loading.
Oh,
Let me see if I can get that up for you.
Okay, well, while you're loading it on, nobody needs to really look at it. This is why we did this, so you could see where you can go for some follow-up. Good. The third link in that little box, SCM Educational Links, is to the EPA. And the Environmental Protection Agency is just coming out with some incredibly useful resources. I'll be putting more up here, but these are both for citizens and for businesses, and all sorts of guides on how to address potential contamination problems, remediation of them, resource savings, etc. And then finally, the last link is Oregon State University's landscape education program for its professional and non-credit education division. And this is where you don't get credits. They're quick courses in water management and permaculture online, master gardening, and really I guess that reinforces something I really want people to understand. Sustainable cemetery management is not anything new. It's applying the natural and organic landscaping techniques we see emerging all over the place in public parks, schoolyards, organic farms, and gardens. And it's simply applying it in a more focused and specialized way to some of the niche concerns of a cemetery. So with that, I'm going to get back to the presentation, and we'll go into the links a little bit more if we have time at the end. But your questions take precedence, and so here's where you can find more information in the future. All right, so let's go to our second slide. And what I want to say here is natural burial is already here. Every cemetery, as most of you know, over 75 years already has unlined or vault-free graves that have full body contact. The cemetery has unembalmed bodies, and the cemetery has caskets that are made of degradable materials, no metal or plastic, or even no casket at all. And so I think that's important because a lot of people think natural burial is something new, and it's not. Secondly, natural burial is easy. Many pioneer and churchyard cemeteries still offer vault-free burials. You often have to only ask or mention that you're of a religious persuasion that doesn't allow for vaults and needs the contact with the earth. Caskets made from biodegradable materials like cardboard and wood have always been allowed in cemeteries. Embalming has nothing to do with natural burial if the embalming fluid doesn't inhibit decomposition. And so, therefore, the way it looks to me, many cemeteries can do natural burials right now, but they just haven't realized it yet. So one of the distinctions that I do find helpful to make for people to keep our conversation clear is that a natural burial is not a natural funeral. A lot of folks speak about them as if they're the same thing. And they talk about wanting a natural burial, and then they proceed to describe all sorts of bits that belong with the funeral or with how the cemetery is managed, and that creates some confusion. So I separate burial out. It sort of sits between two events, the funeral and the landscape maintenance. And so the funeral comes before the burial. And it may not or may be natural. The funeral is about the stuff and the family and the management of the body, but not the disposition itself. And then the landscape maintenance, how the land is treated afterwards, it comes after the burial, and it's about managing the cemetery. So a natural burial may or may not be natural, organic, low impact, woodland, habitat, or conservation oriented. It doesn't have to fit into one tiny box. However, it will be in the soil with full earth contact, and that results in the body decomposing within a reasonable period of time. So what is a natural burial? For the purposes of the conversations I have, it's specifically about the burial of a human body, embalmed or not, in a biodegradable container in the earth with direct soil contact so that it can decompose in a reasonable period of time. And the goal of natural burial, and this touches a little bit on what Dendra talked about with respect to burials connection and cemeteries connections with water. The goal of a natural burial is the full skeletonization of the body through natural decomposition, because a skeletonized body without any fleshy bits attached is a safe body. The pathogens are gone, and so what we really want to see in a cemetery functioning, doing its work as a cemetery, is skeletonizing the body as rapidly as it can, and that renders the body safe. The reason why we like natural burials so much, and I couple it with the conversation about cemeteries, is that natural burial really leads the way. It opens people's minds. Once cemeteries adopt the practice of doing what I've described is obviously pretty easy for most cemeteries to do, the natural burial is likely to appeal to a growing segment of the public and improve business. Natural burial naturally leads to sustainable cemetery management. It gets the public and the governance caring for how the cemetery is managed. They appreciate the green space and the habitat of a cemetery. And they also start to recognize, when they think about it, that somebody's got to maintain the cemetery forever. Right now, burial is in decline. Cemeteries, many of them are struggling for enough business, and the cemeteries need to attract, not lose customers. Increasingly, also, funding is available, becoming available for habitat creation programs. And you don't have to create what could be a costly conservation easement project or something that you can't afford. Because the cemeteries are already dedicated spaces, the ecosystem benefits become community investments that governments are starting to recognize. And because they've got quantifiable participation, i.e. we can count the number of burials or the number of people visiting, that impact becomes measurable. And so when you have a measurable impact, it's actually easier to convince people to at least partner with you on the funding if you're working in a cemetery, running a cemetery, or if you're a part of a city government and you want to convince a state funding program or a donor or a national program to help you remediate your space. And so finally, when you're visibly doing this cemetery that engages in natural practices gets citizens involved, and it gives them a way to spend money on you and helping your cemetery, assuming you're running one. The financial benefits of sustainable cemetery management are also increasingly significant in my belief. Most cemetery balance sheets right now don't include the permanent liability of perpetual maintenance costs. You know, that cemetery is there forever. And so the cost of running that cemetery year after year after year, whether or not a new burial is coming in, new burials are coming in, that cost needs to show up on the balance sheet. And for most cemeteries, it doesn't. What, of course, that means is that at the point the cemetery no longer has income coming in, and they still have that liability on the balance sheet, they need to look to taxpayers for more support. So sustainable cemetery management, just like running farms organically or other kinds of landscapes with less inputs, it minimizes the costs associated with the maintenance of the cemeteries. It lowers the resource and energy use. So not only does it lower the bill, but it lowers the impact the cemetery has on the local community's resources. Many cemeteries use a lot of water for watering lawns, and they don't use reclaimed water necessarily or gray water, but they're often using clean water right out of the city's freshwater supply. And that's going to be increasingly significant as the years go by. And then finally, natural burial and sustainable cemetery management is reducing the future pollution impact of conventional burials. We not only have the resource use and the potential contamination of graves, which I'll talk about later on, but there's the pesticide runoff and the herbicide runoff and the other chemicals associated with lawn treatment. So what I'm going to do now is just a little quick picture tour of what natural burial looks like and what it could be. And I'll pause a little bit on each one of the slides because they are picture slides. And so I'm not sure how quickly they're going to load. If for some reason the pictures don't load fast, do flag up Dendra, please, and slow me down. So I call this little set of pictures here and this activity we're doing, I call it the living cemetery style. The Living Cemetery project itself was based on a UK program called the Living Churchyard Project. And it was an effort that's been highly successful. Over, I think, 6,000 cemeteries in the UK now participate. And they're closed and open churchyard cemeteries who now focus on the habitat and the history of the cemetery. And when they focus on the habitat, they use less chemicals because they don't want to kill the insects and the birds and the squirrels and the other animals living there. So they naturally, when they focus on the life in the cemetery, the managers naturally end up using fewer objectionable inputs and resources. This first picture here is of a cemetery in the UK, in a place called Tarnmoor. They won the UK Cemetery of the Year award. And the stones on the left are what we call cenotaphs, and that's where the graves, the burials there are recorded. And I'll get a little close-up of the picture here. Here's the meadow. This is what we call meadow burial, and the arrows point to the mounds in the grass. And those mounds are graves. They don't do a bunch of reinstatement in this particular section of the cemetery, i.e. they don't fill the graves in because they don't have a reason to make the bumps go away, because this cemetery is tended by sheep. And so the grass is kept down very nicely with the sheep. Here's an example of 3 different styles of a grave in a cemetery that's adopted a natural habitat. And this is an existing cemetery, and it's here in my town of Eugene, Oregon. It's an old Masonic cemetery, and it's filled with graves and headstones. And the first one on the left, the style is a very highly personalized grave. The cemetery allows the planting of small bushes and and native shrubs and plants. In the middle, they have in the middle there, you'll see the arrow points to a tombstone. There's quite a few headstones in this particular picture, but the grass is above it. And this is part of the edgeland of the cemetery, where there's a meadow to the right, and there are fully mature tree cover to the left. And then the picture on the right, you can see there's nature signage deep inside the cemetery, within the trees. You can see all the upright headstones and the people walking around, and there are signs, just like the sorts of signs you'd see in on a park walk. And the signs are both about the families, the people buried in the graves, and they're about the plants. So walking through the cemetery becomes an educational tour for people. It's a really wonderful way for the cemetery to get folks involved and actually learn more about the habitat that's all around them, because the plants growing in the cemetery are growing throughout the community around the cemetery as well. Another one of probably the most popular styles we see is, I've seen in England that people like a lot, is what I call orchard burial. This one here is where the fruit and nut trees are planted, one per grave. You can see some of the flat markers in the area actually have the names of the people on them. And families come in the fall and they gather the fruit at about the same time, because all the tree fruits ripen at the same time. And the cemetery management has found the families begin to share the stories about their loved ones, and it's become quite a popular cemetery for connecting. And this particular section sold out almost immediately, and the manager told me that they're doing more. And so the last couple of pictures here, I just want to show the one on the left. This is the very first living cemetery. It's actually a living churchyard conservation area, is what the sign says there. And it's a very simple technique Ken West in England engaged in. He planted wildflowers. He let the grass grow. He cuts twice a year, once in the late spring, and then once again after the wildflowers have set their seed, and all the little creatures who make the nests inside the meadow have had their kids and they've moved on. And it's a great way to minimize the mowing and the stress on the headstones and the impact on the land itself there. In the middle we have a tree burial, again a single species planted per one tree per grave, a little bit randomly. These are Cumbrian oaks. They're small. They don't get very big. They're native to the area. And they have a relatively short life and grow close together, create a nice little understory that crowds out the grass so it doesn't get long enough to mow, and becomes a lovely place to walk. And then finally on the right-hand side, there's a cemetery that offers a species choice for the tree, and they allow the families to plant whatever they want on top of the grave. And this one's covered in yellow woodruff, and it just makes a beautiful visual in the spring when people want to visit. And then I also want to point out natural burial also looks like this. And the arrow I've got is, you can't really see it too clearly, but it's pointing to a headstone row. And you can see just to the right of the arrow, you see how those tombstones are tipping. Well, that is because of what the cemetery managers rightly discuss as subsidence, where the graves, natural graves, do settle over time. There's a chance that in this particular section the graves just weren't backfilled often enough. Maybe there was a different maintenance guy that year. But generally a vaulted burial you wouldn't have this sinking happen for maybe 100 or more years, whereas and vaults eventually do collapse, so you're bound to look at this sort of a scenario eventually in many cemeteries, even when they do have vaults. But I did want to point out that natural burial can take place in a cemetery just like this. Again, this is in England, and England doesn't use vaults, and most of those headstones are upright. So there's only a handful of them that are tipping like this. I will say that in the slide we were just at, which I'll just pop back to really quickly, this middle section here is actually in the same cemetery as this one, and I almost just had to turn around 180 degrees to shoot the other shot. So I do like to make the point that cemeteries, existing cemeteries, can make the switch, and it can be relatively dramatic, relatively quick, and easy. So, so moving on. I want to go into a little bit of the pollution potential, but first I want to go over some terminology. So things to know about burial. Burial is a legally defined term. It's a form of final disposition, and so that means it's the last time the disposition happens. It's presumed to be permanent, also known as interment. Not all burials are in the ground. Burial, by the way, is a state-defined term, and the definition varies from state to state, describing how a person can be interred or buried. Some interments take place in above-ground group tombs called mausoleums, and some states call those burials burials, and some states call those burials interments. Most cemeteries require vaults or outer burial containers for the caskets to inhibit the decomposition and the sinking we just saw, and forestall grave collapse. They don't necessarily put it off forever, but they forestall it. And this is not law, it's a cemetery policy. So a number of people have been confused on that point, funeral directors and cemetery managers, and so I like to clear that up. Things to know about cemeteries. A lot of people, even people who buy plots, think they're buying a little bit of ground, but they're not buying the ground. They're buying an interment or a burial right, not the actual land. So they're buying the right to bury something there, just kind of like how people might buy a mineral right, and that gives them the right to dig or mine for something. Here people buy a right of interment. They buy it via a contract between themselves and the cemetery owner. And the contract may or may not stipulate a perpetual rights period. And it's kind of ironic. In the absence of an end date, the presumption has to be perpetuity, because the benefit goes to the buyer, and yet there's no thing that we have that would make it illegal for that contract to have an end date. In fact, in Europe, the contracts do have an end date. In Germany, the contracts don't go for more than 15 to 25 years before the rights are end for the one person, and that person can either renew them again if the grave is still in the family and the interest is to do so, or those rights revert back to the cemetery that then resells them. And we'll have a moment to talk about some of these questions a little bit later on, and so if you have some questions in this regard, I just want to say write them down and we'll get to them. This grave reuse topic is usually interesting to people. Once the cemetery has sold all its interment rights, especially if it doesn't have the ability to reuse graves, it uses an endowment fund, a trust account set aside for maintenance. And if there is no fund, the cemetery is often abandoned until a city or a county picks up the tab. Another thing that's interesting about cemeteries is that they have a particular kind of status and ability to actually do something, whether or not they're closed or open, or active or not. So an active or inactive cemetery whether the cemetery is taking new burials or not taking new burials, the cemetery is forever. And I like to remind cemetery owners and communities that just because the cemetery is no longer active or closed, the impacts don't end, and it doesn't have any new income. The activity is measured based on the number of interments per year. There are a lot of small cemeteries that are less than 10 interments a year, and we have large cemeteries that can do over 1,000 interments a year. I don't remember the exact number for Arlington Cemetery, but they do a lot of burials in our national cemetery there. And then there's a variance in the ownership type. Generally, there's 3 major categories. There's the non-profit cemeteries, which are historic, public nonprofits, or church-owned or institutional cemeteries. There are municipal cemeteries. Those are owned and run by counties or towns or cities. And quite often a lot of the cemeteries that are municipal started out as historic church or private cemeteries and then were abandoned. And so they were brought into the municipality in order to put them on the budget to take care of them. And then the third class is private cemeteries. Usually either active or abandoned, and they may or may not be profitable. Generally, if a cemetery is abandoned, it's often not put on the tax rolls until it becomes what we call an enforceable nuisance, and which means it's breaking some sort of code somewhere that a government can go after somebody about or needs to do something about. And a lot of our rural cemeteries that are no longer used kind of fit in this last category. They're not really a problem to anyone yet, and nobody's caring for them, and they're not active. So let's see. Things to know about cemetery governance. There's no comprehensive federal governance running cemeteries. We do have the Clean Water Act, which provides general siting guidance for all businesses within a certain distance from a stream or potable fresh water. We have the Clean Air Act that provides general emissions guidance, but none specific to cemeteries or crematoria. And then we have the Federal Trade Commission, which offers consumer protection primarily related to advertising and how customers are dealt with commercially through the funeral rules. There are state-run boards, commissions, and departments that oversee cemeteries, and every state has a cemetery board that makes its rules. The rules often exempt individuals and religious groups. This is a professional guidance board, and so it's not really a place where law is made. Although the legislature often defers to the commission or the board for legislative rules. Again, those rules are preempted by the Constitution, and so usually those rules won't apply to religious groups and other classes, protected classes of people. And these state boards rules vary a lot from state to state to state, and the variance is pretty interesting. Most states, for example, require licensing, professional licensing of funeral directors. Colorado does not, as an example, and has quite a thriving funeral business sector there. So in the last few years, conversations are heating up about what the role of the state should be in regulating cemeteries and regulating funerals. I want to take a little bit of time here just to take a detour into the word green, because green burial and green funerals have been coming up a lot in the last few years. The term is a problematic one for me. I don't use the word green, and I do want to talk about it just a little bit here. I don't use it because it's confusing. It means different things to different people, and that kind of confusion isn't helpful, especially when you're dealing with end-of-life topics that are that are very complicated and layered. The terms primarily, it was created by marketing people, and it's used and defined at this point primarily by different groups of people who promote businesses or products or services that are under their brand of green. And it's a word that's specifically regulated by the FTC. The FTC's green guides, which I pointed to on my website, have very particular labeling language required to be on labels and brochures that use the word green whenever green means environmental. And so I stay away from that word also because I don't like to get into that sort of complication. So what I usually say is green is a color. The EPA says green is undefinable and it's site-specific, that you can't even have green mean the same thing from site to site to site, and they're very clear about that. So I find sustainable more useful when describing activities that have social and environmental benefits. I like that term. The word sustain means we can keep it up. We can do it for a while or for a long time, and then we can argue about whether or not we can do something for a long time, which is where the debate should be, because when we can do it for a long time and it's sustainable, usually that's what we want. I also like the word natural. It's a good catch-all phrase. It suggests the use of non-synthetic things, and it's also specifically exempt from the FTC regulation. It was exempted back in the early 90s. I've been in the natural products industry for almost 3 decades, and we argued about it back in the early 90s, and all agreed that natural was an okay term to use. So I've stuck with that pretty religiously. So I want to go back to basics here and just cover a few statistics that are helpful. Whether or not you're in a governmental role or you're running a cemetery or you're running a funeral home and you're interested in the quote-unquote size of the market, these basics can help you calculate, kind of create a context and a baseline for whether or not what you want to do could be a good financial move. In the U.S., the death rate's approximately 0.84% per annum, so a little less than 1% of us die every year, and that's kind of a good back of the napkin number to use when you're figuring out this sort of stuff, and the death rate's rising because we baby boomers just hit 60, and we all expect to be, more of us are hitting the age at which we die than ever before, and more of us will hit that age for the next 20 plus years. Right now there's a difference in cremation and burial of about 37, 38, mid-60s%. So out here in Oregon where I am, we're closer to 65% cremation and 35% burial. But the cremation rate is rising really quickly. Most buried caskets in the U.S. are stamped steel with plastic-based upholstery. And 99% of those casketed burials go into burial vaults. And you can do a little bit of math here and figure out basically how many casketed burials, how many caskets are going into cemeteries when you plug that number into this death rate per year. There are some significant unknowns. We do not have any current U.S. analysis of cemetery impacts on the environment or public health. That simply hasn't been undertaken yet. And we don't know how many cemeteries are currently operating in the U.S. We don't know which ones have maintenance funds, the future endowment funds. We don't know which ones don't. We don't know when we'll need more space. There's no cemetery capacity study being done, even in the metropolitan areas. And a lot of people say, oh, well, we've got a lot of room over here in the United States. We don't need more room. We can always make more cemeteries. But, you know, try that in downtown Chicago or New York City or Atlanta or Los Angeles. They're not making new land, and not everyone, in fact, most people want the cemetery to be relatively near where they live and close to their community. They're not looking to be flown out to a forested wilderness at their death. Many people are buried in cemeteries because the cemetery provides a place of remembrance and a place to visit. And so with, 50% of us headed to cities by 2050, city cemeteries are becoming incredibly important. So I wanted to take a moment here and come at this from the perspective of a community leader, perhaps, or somebody who becomes involved or interested in cemeteries, or somebody who's owning a cemetery and wants to explore changing their practices. And I came up with 4 kind of standard questions that I get a lot, no matter whom I'm speaking to. So imagine a man walks into his local planning or health department, and you're either the person walking in or you're the person sitting on the other side of the counter, and you've got to answer the question. People want to know, may they bury on their own property? People want to know whether or not there are rules about cemeteries that offer natural burial. Sometimes people are on the volunteer planning commission for the community, or they're on a church board that runs a cemetery or a local nonprofit, and one of their members wants to add natural burial, so they want to know if it's safe. And maybe they work for a large cemetery company, and they just invested a lot of money in cemeteries in the state, and they want to know about what's going to happen with natural burial, whether or not it's an option for them. And so we're going to take each one of those on one at a time. May I bury on my own property? Right now, Michigan law, and actually most states, I believe, permits human remains to be interred in a private burial ground outside an incorporated area. And the governance for that is usually found within the county land use codes. Inside incorporated areas in Michigan, private burials are subject to something they call the General Law Village Act. Many states have something equivalent because when the states were first settled, the cemeteries there weren't a lot of cemeteries, and so in state charters and constitutions the provision was made often at that time for burial by individuals on their private land, or churches practicing religious freedom, for example. Another question, kind of along these lines, because somebody owns property, they may want to start a natural burial cemetery on their land, open to the public, and not just for their families. And generally, provided no health and safety or licensing barriers exist, because those vary from state to state, the permission for a cemetery business lies with, again, the local planning authorities and the state cemetery board. And from my conversations with state cemetery boards, they're usually very receptive to dealing with the local planning authorities and working something out between them. So the answer to may I bury is it depends, and but it's pretty straightforward. Are there rules? Well, what people, when they ask this question, usually mean, are there rules, is they mean, are there more special rules? Are there more stringent rules related to natural burial than to other types of burial? And they're asking often, if there aren't any rules about the interment itself, does the state currently regulate any standard of care for perpetual cemetery management that pertains only to natural burial, different from how they may regulate the standard of care for any other cemetery? And the answer is, and will probably remain, no. A cemetery is a cemetery regardless of how it's it inters the bodies, and natural burials have not been proven to be, and indeed the research actually shows otherwise. Natural burials are not a greater threat to public health and safety. We won't have time to go into all of the reasons why here, but the research is very interesting, and we're covering it in our future classes. Is it safe? And this is a real interesting question to deal with, especially when we don't really have research here in this country to draw on. One of the ways to start thinking about the answer to this question is to think about who's going to be wondering it. And so here's a list of the types of people that I've spoken to who ask the question. Those could be on your planning commission or the municipal staff in a community. There's the legislators who vote the laws in. There's the boards of the nonprofit and the church cemeteries, the institutional cemeteries. There's the cemetery owners and the funeral directors and the cemetery, the citizens and the neighbors. And so they're the folks wondering this, and they're asking what I pointed out is kind of an unanswerable question right now. So one of the devices I use to answer the question is to look at the common safety objections that the cemetery operators themselves have. So when I ask a cemetery operator, well, why don't you offer a natural burial? And I let them answer me, and I can start to look at some of the safety issues. So one of the things I hear a lot is a vault-free grave is a hazard. And so I respond, well, cemetery liability insurance already covers this hazard. Generally, cemeteries are concerned about graves collapsing, and so one of the standard bits of cemetery insurance is the insurability of a grave should it collapse. So their liability insurance already covers that part. Actually, it turns out the hazards might even decrease with the vault-free graves. When you have a biodegrading system underneath that dirt there, it causes the grave to settle and close. The majority of the closure takes place within 18 to 24 months, depending on the soil and the site, with minor reinstatements afterward. Usually after a couple of winters where the surface has been waterlogged and the soil has gotten heavy, the final collapses have happened, and so the management and the maintenance is actually easier, because within a couple of years the major collapse potential is over, and the cemetery gravekeeper doesn't have to worry about the hole collapsing in 20, 30, or 40 years like they might otherwise. Natural burials are shallower, and so they're further above the water table. Sometimes as much as 50% above, and that's a big difference. When you have a grave well above the water table, you really do minimize the possibility of the contaminants from the casket leaching. And again, that relates to the third comment there. You see no plastics, finishes, or heavy metals leaching into groundwater, and that's because the biodegradable coffins that are used in a natural burial are generally non-synthetic and don't have the high concentrations of potential contaminants that the other casket materials do. Another comment that cemetery operators will make is that the vault-free graves create the maintenance problems. And what I like to point out here is that vault-free graves have different costs. So they have some maintenance problems that are different than the current vault maintenance problems that they introduce. But my calculations actually show that the maintenance problems a natural grave introduces are less costly than the ones that a conventional vaulted burial brings to the cemetery operator. Lined graves of any kind generally don't count the future costs of the liner failure or the future abandonment when the cemeteries are full and that particular space is out of commission forever. And then finally, the health departments and the government authorities who make laws, they're regulating public hazards and future taxpayer liabilities, and they're not out to regulate business activity costs. So if you're sitting on the side of the regulation maker, you have to remember which hat you're wearing. Again, there's some thinking tips I came up with that seem to work to also deal with the question, is it safe? When you're thinking or talking about a cemetery, if you just remove the word natural and just say burial, that becomes a little simpler when you're trying to make a distinction between safe or not. And with respect to regulations, so I say treat conventional burial and natural burial as the same thing until science proves them different. And that's really core. Burial is burial, whether it's conventional or not. And let's let the science about the differences or impacts, the differences between the two or the impacts of the two, let's let that science lead to the rules that we make. Make a constant and clear distinction between existing and new cemetery activity as well. This is mostly when I'm speaking to people who want to either want to regulate cemeteries. I want them to keep in mind that they have existing cemeteries that already are going to be grandfathered in, and they have new cemeteries that when they're established now are still being established under old rules. And in a couple of slides we'll talk about why communities and states might want to slow down a little bit with the expansion of new sites until we learn a bit more. And then finally, I suggest that they substitute the following activities or uses for cemetery and see if it helps evaluate the impact within the existing risk analysis systems. And again, remember, we're addressing the concept here, is natural burial safe? So you can think about existing septic tank systems or existing dairy farms. Little statistic off to the side there, 50 2,000-pound cows is approximately equal to 500 200-pound humans. And a dairy farm's impacts on water are calculated by the number of animals that are permitted to be on the ground per acre and related to the rainfall and the water table and everything. So I thought a cemetery would kind of be the same thing with respect to load. And if you remember from our activity level of cemeteries, a large cemetery is doing 1,000+ burials a year. 500 burials per year is a lot of activity. We also currently permit existing on-farm composting operations, and we have existing landfills. So cemeteries as a waste management category, which there's no disrespect intended there, but that is exactly what's taking place. This is a disposition management system. They are comparable to these other industrial uses. So with those things in mind, I like to continue my visit to the Perspective Department in Michigan. For example, a landfill will be permitted to handle 100 tons a day or less, and they can buy a 5-year fee to do that for $250. A campground septic system is permitted 1,000 gallons of waste per day. In animal carcass burial, well, those livestock operations, they're allowed 5 cows per acre. And composting livestock is actually permitted at the normal death rate of the cows. So a little note there you can see at the bottom, 50 human burials a year equals 5 tons per acre. That puts a cemetery offering natural burials at 50 people per acre per year, which is a pretty active cemetery, actually. So I want to take a moment here, and I think Dindra is going to help facilitate this. I'm going to take us through in Michigan what Michigan currently allows, and then we're actually going to have a little interactivity moment we'll blunder through together with the buttons we're supposed to hit. So I asked the question, is a natural burial more or less safe than current practice? Existing Michigan cemetery practice currently allows the routine burial of bodies unverified by testing for reportable diseases or soil persistent pathogens. During the embalming practice, and this is permitted, body fluids, blood, and macerated organs are discharged into the local water system. In cases of reportable contagious disease, this embalming practice is actually required by Michigan law. I did go a little bit more deeply into the regulations. I do want to make a caveat here. Most states require embalming when a person's died of a reportable contagious disease. Michigan actually does not, except for when that body is shipped non-locally. It's an interesting distinction. I just have caught it going through the regs in the last few months, and haven't had a lot of time to follow up on it. But the point's the same. Whether somebody died of a contagious reportable, that means a highly contagious disease, or unknown causes or one of many causes, and the body is embalmed, the effluent from that embalming process is discharged into the sanitary sewer system. And then finally, under current practice, burial of caskets and vaults made with toxic finishes, plastics, and synthetics that will degrade and leach over time are allowed to be buried. Not saying they shouldn't, I'm just saying that's the existing law. Michigan practice also allows the bodies to be confined in vaults that inhibit skeletonization and eventually leak. The vaults do eventually leak. Maybe it takes 100 years, but they eventually leak. Remember, skeletonization of the body is a goal. The faster the soil can get the body skeletonized, the more rapidly the pathogens that may be in that body are deactivated, so to speak. Michigan cemetery practice and all other states, as far as I can tell, by the way, also permit the burial of a casket or a vault below the water table. And then finally, Michigan practice and many other states permits the routine burial of medical waste. So that means if somebody's passed away in the hospital, it's more convenient for the hospital to oftentimes put the medical waste right in there, tubes and whatever is related to the body or was connected to the person at the time of death can be right there in the body bag, the funeral directors have told me. And in Michigan it's required to be transported in a rupture-resistant container, but it can be placed in the casket. Actually, they have a new stipulation. The medical waste itself must be in a rupture-proof container, but I don't know what the standards for that are. So let's see here. I'm going to just jump ahead really quick because this is actually my question moment, and we had our questions in a different place. Dindra, can you help here?
Do you want to take one question at a time?
Yeah, well, why don't you talk about, we'll take one question at a time, and I'm just going to preface this by saying to everybody, when I first did these questions, we did it in an environment where it was live, and that meant people were talking to me from the floor. And so I realize that not everyone's with the state of Michigan, and so you don't know if these things I'm saying here are law or not. But the question probably should read as, do you agree with my statements that it's provisionally probably true, not being lawyers, or do you have an actual reason why you know it's not true? If you have a reason and you disagree with the statement and you know it's not true, then definitely vote disagree, and we'll find a way to talk about your disagreement. Because where I'm going to here is I'm looking at us all recognizing that whether it's safe or not, these are the things that Michigan and other states currently allow. Remember, we're comparing the possible safety of natural burial to conventional burial, and so I'm helping us all get to the space where we understand that what we currently do is pretty impactful.
So actually, although we are hoping that we get a lot of coverage about this within the state of Michigan, you can substitute your own state in here. But above your participant name list, you'll see a little symbol that is a check mark. And if you click on that, you see there's a little arrow goes down. Green check would mean yes, you agree. Red X would mean no, you disagree. Go ahead and click on that for me. And it looks to me like it's pretty unanimous, Cynthia. They agree.
I'm curious if the people who haven't checked green, if they could just type in really quickly whether or not they have a reason that they disagree with the number 1 there.
Yeah, I'm going to clear the results. Beth and Jason and Melissa, if you have a microphone, oh, I see Beth and Jason are typing in here, but if you would like at this point, you have a microphone. I'm going to go ahead then and enable everyone's audio permissions. So,
well, Beth and Jason just typed in don't agree or disagree, so that's a stand aside. And Melissa said agree. Okay, so I think we got there that basically everybody's saying they recognize that this is currently happening. Let's go on to the second one. I think this is going to work.
So have a look at that second question there. And if you would prefer to just click on the microphone button and talk to us, go right ahead, or click the green check or the red X.
Okay, we've got, oh, there you are, green Dan. Dan Wagner is my cemetery ringer out there, and so I wanted to make sure that we were all cool. And Beth and Jason, since you don't agree or disagree, I'm just going to assume, would you click the green if you agree that you dock? Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay. Yay. Good. And then finally, the last one is that, and I think we may sort of be there. Oh, you're still green, Beth and Jason. That's great. Existing Michigan regulations currently permit the burial of the untreated medical waste inside caskets. And I think if anybody knows that they don't permit that, let's hit that disagree button. Excellent. Thank you very much. I'm trying to flush out here a misunderstanding on my part about the law, because I'm really interested in being accurate about the law. So just get back into the fray here, because I do want to make sure we've got enough room for questions. The point being that let's see here, let me get on the right slide. The point being that, is it safe? Yeah, here we go. The point being that whether it's safe or not, these are the things that we're currently doing. And most everyone I talk to, once they go through this level of examination of the issue, recognize that mostly what we have to do is learn more. But the question still remains, is it safe? I mean, is it really safe? Because we all want to be safe. So I've taken quite a bit of time and looked into the current UK European practices. And by way of saying what they currently do with respect to natural burial, vault-free burial in UK and European cemeteries is standard and has been for decades. In fact, it's been pretty difficult for the American casket industry to get the metal casket and vault system established over there, and they've tried. There are over 250 dedicated natural burial cemeteries in the UK alone right now. And in the European nations like Norway, Sweden, Germany, those cemeteries practice grave reuse, as I mentioned. And right now, London, because it has run out of grave space almost completely, is currently experimenting with grave reuse. In the UK, where they've done about over a decade of pretty good water-related research now, the general conclusions from their research are that pollution from all cemeteries is potentially significant enough to regulate. And what they found is that the pollutants that are related to cemeteries are similar to the non-putrescible landfill, the non-decomposing landfill that's associated with anaerobic airless digestion. That's the legal term, which means that basically a cemetery and a landfill and the stuff that comes out of the bottom of it is very similar. And that primarily the pollution problems related to cemeteries are related to groundwater and surface contamination. Primarily groundwater, some surface. So the UK has clamped down on conventional practices. They have new restrictions on all new cemeteries. The standards are rapidly evolving, so they're changing monthly practically. There's new findings all the time. Takes a while to work its way into regulation, but it is getting there. And the regs, they're treating the sites as landfills, and the trend is going to be to require the clay caps, land structure underneath the site with no possibility of the leachate reaching an aquifer or nearby protected waters, and absolutely no potential of the cemetery being underneath a seasonal water table. Just never at all. And these new regulations are applying to new sites and extensions of existing cemeteries that want to expand. This is a little technical language here. It basically talks about how the land use people define land, protected land, around source protection zones, which means water sources. So when a water source is used by a city, it becomes a protected area, and then there are zones around that water source where the use is restricted, and cemeteries are rapidly getting moved or sited away from those. And they actually drew a lot of their research initially on agricultural statistics, agricultural methodologies, and then they've been going back in and starting to measure cemeteries recently. But they've based their initial calculations on their experience with agricultural sites and landfills. That was and so let's go back to that set of questions instead of questioning people, and back to our planning desk for one last customer, which is the industry. The industry, the funeral industry, by that I mean cemetery people and funeral director people, and the people who make the goods sold in those businesses. Their first reaction to it in the UK and in Australia was yuck, or they treated the natural trend as a fad. And a lot of them saw, and most of them still see, this new technique set as a threat to their current market share. And at first in Australia, the industry there actually engaged the authorities to look at the pollution potential from the natural burials, thinking it was going to be a problem. And this happened in the UK. But what they found out was that it was actually the conventional practices that were posing the largest threat. And so they opened up a little bit of a can of worms there. Formaldehyde for embalming has been banned in Europe for some time. European Union and the US is now preparing to take similar steps. So it'll probably take 3 to 5 years, but that's going to be shifting in the direction of less and less encouragement of formaldehyde-based embalming. And then conventional burial sales are also declining rapidly, cremation surging ahead. And so we're expecting the cemetery companies, both large and small, to start wondering whether or not sustainable cemetery management and natural burial offer offer a way forward that could be a win-win-win for a cemetery, a community, a water quality manager, and a citizen. So here's the private enterprise, and they work for a cemetery. Somebody contacts the government or the city planner, environmental health person, says, I work for a cemetery corporation. We've just invested a bunch of money in your cemeteries in your state, and we're curious about this natural burial. So they're wondering, will natural burial be discriminated against or encouraged? Will new research cause the cemeteries to be subject to tougher regs like the UK's? As the cemetery troubles start to show, and I'm talking about here the financial challenges of cemeteries, will the state lawmakers start to change the funeral service commerce rules? Right now Michigan has what's called an anti-combo law, which prohibits a cemetery to offer funeral services or a funeral home to engage and own a cemetery. And that kind of creates limits for each business to add the products and services that it might need to survive. And that might not stand a Commerce Clause test. And in some states it's argued that those are protectionist rules, and those might be eliminated, letting more competition into the market. So the core concerns come back to, again, is it safe? Well, based on the exercise we just went through, natural burial is probably as safe as what we're currently doing. And so when compared to other activities, the chances of natural burial getting some kind of special, more onerous regulation than conventional practice is probably pretty low. Well, so does the future contain changes in the current cemetery regulations, or are things likely to stay the same? Again, based on what we've seen in the other countries, they're probably going to change. If the UK is any indication, if the laws of physics are the same from country to country, which I think they are, you're going to see the research that's going to have to first identify where the harm or the benefit occurs. That's going to have to be done. But then eventually there's going to be rules that are going to be made that are going to respond to the findings of research. So, you know, it may not happen overnight, but the trend is there. But the bottom line, so what I really want people to understand is that no matter what the answers to all these questions turn out to be, and they're not easy answers, you can tell, the bottom line has to be that long-term cemetery success is what everyone wants. The state, Michigan, any state, needs all of its cemeteries to be successful. When they're not successful, they go on the public bankroll, and the sooner the cemeteries can be switched to sustainable techniques, the better it is for everybody. The better it is for the cemetery manager, the better it is for the public that wants the natural options now, and the better it is for the public, who otherwise is going to end up footing the bill for the bankrupt, non-productive and non-polluting sites. So I've got some next steps that are probably fairly self-evident. Risk-benefit assessment a state could do, cities need to do, and states need to do cemetery capacity assessments. They need to do feasibility studies, and they need to start looking into the same remediation techniques that they would use in other places. Some resources here. I think, let me just pop ahead because I want to get to questions. There's a research page, but that's not as important, although that's all of us. Here's my call. Encourage change. So get educated, call for research, and support municipal cemetery transition. I've got some links on our website. I don't want to go back there yet because we've got about 10 minutes more at least, and I'd love to take a moment here to have Dendra help facilitate some questions. Let's do that, yes?
Sure. I do see that Russell started to type something into the question window, but perhaps, remember, you do have to, after you've typed it, hit the return or enter button for it to appear. But does anyone have questions that they would? There we go. I did enable everybody's microphone and make sure that we have enough enabled. If anyone would like to turn their microphone on and ask a question now or type it in, go right ahead and introduce yourself. Well, not seeing anybody leap at this, Cynthia. Let's go back to. Oh, there's one.
There's a ding.
Yes, there's a Cynthia. And there's a couple of questions coming in. So
okay,
go ahead, Christine. Your microphone is enabled. Just hit the talk button. Oh, she left the room here. Beth and Jason are typing a message in, so is Cynthia. So while we're waiting for their questions to come in, there were a couple of local township officials here who were hoping to be able to join us, but where would you start if your municipal cemetery was starting to experience some real financial hardships? Where would you start if you were considering adopting a natural burial? Would you have to go into your local ordinance?
Well, first of all, let's see, you asked that question right as Cynthia's came through, and it's, so Cynthia and Beth and Jason have 2 questions up. I'll get to those, and then I will,
okay.
I'll finish up with that one you just asked, Dendra. So Cynthia Pickle is asking, do you know if current cemeteries are required to have monitoring wells like landfills? At this time, no. I've been working, speaking to the Environmental Protection Agency to see if we can at least begin to get a couple of assessment projects going. It's all related to funding, and the monitoring wells is a pretty expensive operation. Landfills have existing right now, the ones that have those monitoring wells that aren't grant funded. Those landfills have current income, and they're expected to not pollute. So they're pretty well developed in this sector. But no, at this time I know of no community that currently has any cemetery on monitoring. Let's see, have there been cases where cemeteries have been cited for pollution? Have there been any remediation efforts associated with polluting cemeteries? Thanks for those. Again, I'm not aware that the cemetery, of any cemeteries that have been cited for pollution. We're just not testing for that yet. This is a relatively new question that's just breaking the surface of the regulators' interest. With respect to remediation efforts associated with the polluting cemeteries, since we don't have any examples, we can't really talk about remediation efforts yet. However, in a way, cemetery managers or water quality people can be proactive. If you've got a cemetery where you know the activities going on at least seasonally below a water table, or the cemeteries in a dense urban population where there's a sole source aquifer beneath it, you could possibly make the assumption that eventually gravity is going to win. And so remediation could begin. One of the interesting things happens to be this new field called bioremediation that utilizes, or phytoremediation, same word, same term, uses plants, deep-rooted trees, and other kinds of vegetation to actually start to pull the potential contaminants out of the soil. And in my Living Cemetery program, I recommend these things called memorial habitat hedgerows, which are dense willow and other plant hedgerows planted around the perimeter of cemeteries to create a buffer zone and to begin to just assume that there is contamination and that those plants can then begin to uptake that. And so if you start your memorial hedgerow at the base or the low part of your land, you actually can you can get a nice cemetery feature that you can offer for perhaps your cremated remains interments, build some habitat and green space, and start your remediation right there. Let's see. Oh, this question here. No, wondering if the presentation will be available after the webinar. I'm not sure. Dendra, is this available after the webinar?
Yeah, everyone who signed up and registered will receive a link to the YouTube. If you would like a low resolution PDF of the slides, the smaller size slides, we'll be happy to provide that, and we'll send it up to our Google Docs file. And I see Dan Wagner has his microphone turned on. Dan, did you have a comment? Go ahead, Dan. Nope, not hearing that.
Well, I would love to hear from Dan. So Dan, if you get it figured out, just bust in. In the meantime, what I'm going to just remind people of is we've got the first course in Sustainable Cemetery Management available online. Should be starting through OSU in January, and we're hoping to offer it then. And it is a credit or non-credit course, but you don't have to be a university student or qualify for the university to get in. This course is designed for the professional public and students, and we're assuming that cemetery operators may find it interesting to take. You can contact me directly through the Natural Burial Company to talk more. I have an extensive consultation network. I work very closely with people in the UK and planners here in the United States, and we're just very interested in helping cities and municipalities or cemeteries or wastewater managers begin to tackle this problem. And I'm not sure what everybody's role is. Oh, Dan, if you have a question, I see your thing there. Why don't you could type it in as well. If we're not hearing you, but I sure would love to hear from you. Dan Wagner operates, he's on the board of Marble Park Cemetery, which is just south of Ann Arbor in Milan, Michigan. And Dan is running what I consider a really excellent example of a historic small community cemetery that has just simply recognized natural burial is easy, and we can do it. And they're now beginning to I think connect with the community that's right outside of Ann Arbor, where the University of Michigan is, and I'm excited about the possibilities of seeing Marble Park Cemetery add more of the living cemetery style schemes, the meadow burial and the hedgerows and the other things that the fruit orchard and the things that we like to encourage. So let's see. Anybody else got any thoughts?
Well, I see Cynthia as a really good suggestion here is to work with some of the forensic science schools that routinely have classes that study decomposition and how to determine age and talk about putrefaction and all kinds of interesting things. So it's a good idea, Cynthia.
Yeah, well, and I'm really looking forward to eventually seeing at OSU here, we're focusing on the management of the cemetery itself. The University of Tennessee has Bill Bass's Body Farm, which is just it's a fascinating program. They focus on, of course, the decomposition of the body and study primarily forensic entomology to explore that. And we're still looking for ways to connect, but they typically they're in the physical anthropology fields, the forensic entomologists, and so they don't necessarily intersect with the landscape management, which is again where we find our interest. We really want to pay attention to how the cemeteries are managed for the future and what we can do to help them. Dan did type in a comment. It says, I don't know if everybody can read it, but it says in southeast Michigan many years ago the USGS drilled monitoring wells in cemeteries cemeteries, not to check for pollution, but for aquifer studies. So, you know, those wells are there. That's really interesting. We may be able to take advantage of those existing wells. I hadn't even thought of using the USGS as a map for wells, and that's a great idea. Let's see. Oh, it was done in cemeteries because they were easy to get to without difficulty in obtaining permission. Of course. Sure. Well, you know, then the USGS might have those monitoring wells all over the place. And if so, that would give us a relatively low-cost entry to get in there and check again. Thanks for that, Dan. That's a good idea.
Yeah, and to add to that, Cynthia, and we have two Cynthias on the line today, so I'm talking to you, Cynthia B, as opposed to Cynthia P. But for everyone who's on this call today, you come from different locations, different soils, conditions, different water tables, and I would see this as a really good cooperative research project. If anyone on the call is interested in putting together a group RFP proposal to go out and seek funding to do this, I think it's a very worthy project.
Well, I agree, and I guess I'm like you, Dendra. I'm always interested in being able to reconnect if we've sparked some interest. So for those of you who are listening now, and for those of you who listen later and want to be kept apprised or do more, do make sure that you connect up with both myself and with Dendra. I have a feeling we're going to be convening some sort of a long-term conversation that will probably be multi-state, and we'll be addressing this issue from all of these different perspectives. I don't know where everybody's from or who's currently on the call, but as you could see from my presentation, there are a lot of different, what we call stakeholders, that have very different interests in this process, and yet no one group can actually define what's going to work for everyone. This really is going to be a collaboration. It's probably going to take place over a 5 to 10 year period. But my prediction is that when we get to 2020, we're going to have a very different level of attention paid to cemeteries and a different level of understanding about what they mean for our communities, both from that stick side, you know, which is the potential for pollution that insurers should probably be the most concerned about right now, and from the carrot side, which is this ability to actually take an existing facility inside a community and bring it to community interest and bring the community's history back in front of its face and put that with green space and habitat and with the actual really significant moment of gathering together as family or friends when we lose someone important. So I think we're there. We're at the end of time, right, Dendra?
Yeah, we can run over for a little bit. I see we haven't lost many people, which is a good thing. This is obviously a topic that was of great interest, and every time we talk about this, people look at it and rethink it and realize that this is something that had never even crossed their radar and really should. And going back to, if you could just address that one question that was sent in from the township official, how would we start? Do we have to start with our cemetery management ordinance? Do we need to get a legal opinion? How do we start?
Okay, if I were right now, if I were in city governance, looking at this, first of all, if I were them, I'd probably call me, only because that's a nice shortcut, and I can help them cut to the chase, and I'm perfectly willing to do that. Because probably in a community, you're going to want to see if you actually have a cemetery that reasonably poses an issue for your community's immediate future. For example, I'm here in Michigan. I'm here in Oregon right now, and there's a very large cemetery that's located kind of on the edge of town, and it is below the water table. The ground of the cemetery is submerged for several months in the winter, so much so that the Canadian geese, when they're migrating, stop at the cemetery and spend part of a vacation there eating all the new grass shoots because it's looks like a rice paddy. The cemetery is located across the road from the main reservoir that feeds into the Willamette River that flows 100 miles into Portland and is used for irrigation. It's one of the breadbaskets of the Pacific Northwest. So if I were a city manager, I'd be saying to myself, this looks like a potential issue. What would we do? Obviously, in order to get funding to address a problem, there's going to have to be research to prove that there's a problem. Your community may have already have some programs in place that allow for examination of a problem. Looking at the potential problem of a cemetery is politically challenging. Usually, a cemetery owner or the funeral director, funeral home, people are actually very involved in the community. And you want to be delicate about it and not necessarily cast aspersions immediately. So it's a touchy subject politically as well. However, a water quality manager just can't look the other way. One of the reasons why I advocate the cemeteries converting to sustainable cemetery management is, as I alluded to before, if they begin to plant the habitat hedgerows and they put those hedgerows into primarily willow, or other plants that are proven to be bioremediators, which means those plants have deep-going roots that actually suck up the heavy metal and other contaminants. If they put those plants now as habitat hedgerows in the low portions of their cemetery, they've started the vacuum cleaner system. So whether or not they eventually find the pollution there, they've put the vacuum cleaners in place. There are a lot of other plants and things that can help for that, but the willow is the main one. And I'll give a little anecdote about the willow. I was recently I had a company site that was in an old laundry facility. And the laundry facility was for over 50 years had been dumping perchlorate solution. It was a very highly toxic laundry cleaner in the ground right outside the cemetery. And they were certain, right outside the company. And they were certain that the site was going to be contaminated. And they drilled all of these wells, and they went down 3 times as deep as they normally do looking for the perchlorate because they always find it. And there was none. There was absolutely none. Well, it turned out that 30 years ago, the company owner had planted a willow tree, big curly willow tree that was about probably 24 inches in diameter when I had my business there. And they finally decided that that willow tree had sucked up all of that perchlorate solution and had basically broken it down in the sucking it up. And so there was nothing left under the laundry site. So I got a question here. Oh, Dan, here you are. It's my understanding that Michigan DEQ does have input on new cemeteries and expansion. May want to check this, and I would suggest the local environmental health. Perfect. I wonder if that's as a result of that seminar we did a couple of years ago, Dendra, with the Michigan WasteWater or the Michigan Education.
It could be. I know there's been some updating on cemetery law within the state of Michigan. At the local environmental health level, it's still very much county by county. So,
yeah. So I just wanted to close up with that last answer for your official and say, again, my we can't go in with remediation until we prove it's a problem. The problem is expensive and difficult to prove. The best thing to do right away is to actually encourage the cemeteries to begin to do sustainable landscape management and planting techniques to move towards this living cemetery style, because they can put that in immediately, brings in new business, greens up the ground, slows down the resource use and any contaminants, so it starts lessening the future load right away. And then we can assume that we're all going to be having this chunk of challenge to deal with over the next 20, 30 years, but we will already be practicing the solutions. And when businesses are practicing the solutions to the problems, before the problems are even uncovered, everybody feels a lot better.
Well, thank you, Cynthia. I can't thank you enough for giving so freely and generously of your time today. I'm seeing a lot of great comments about how well the presentation went and that it covered a lot of the information people were looking for. And this is our closing slide. Again, you'll see our contact information there, and you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, and we now have a Pinterest board. And if you are interested in supporting our organization, you will find this web decal is available on our website. Download it, use it as an attachment on your emails, or if you want to link to us on your website, by all means do. And if you have a suggestion for a follow-up to this, or a different topic for the Tuesday at 2 sessions, do shoot me an email or give me a call. Happy to talk to you. And I'm going to close the recording now, but do stay around and we will be happy to take any other questions. So once again, Cynthia, thank you so much, and we will certainly be doing a follow-up.
Thank you, folks. It was great. A lot of fun.